You wake up one morning, and the world feels wrong. The air is heavy, the streets outside are crowded, but the people don't move like people anymore. Their eyes are glazed, their voices repeat, word for word, like a script rehearsed 1,000 times. Their laughter echoes, hollow, mechanical, almost inhuman. You ask a question, just one, and silence crashes down, smiles tighten, faces harden, and suddenly you feel it. They don't think the world is insane, they think you are. This is how mass psychosis begins, not with chaos, but with conformity, not with violence, but with whispers, not with freedom, but with fear. History has shown us again and again, entire nations, entire civilizations, falling under the same spell. Ordinary people convinced that lies were truth, that madness was sanity, that obedience was salvation. And here's the terrifying part. It's happening again. This is not a nightmare. It is the ordinary reality of an age drowning in mass psychosis. We like to imagine madness as an individual illness, one person talking to shadows, one mind unraveling alone. But history reveals something far more terrifying. Entire societies can fall into a trance together. Entire nations can abandon logic, reject truth, and cling desperately to illusions that make no sense when spoken aloud. And the most chilling part, they don't know they've lost their minds. To them, conformity is sanity, and questioning is madness. Consider this paradox. The sane man in an insane world is not recognized as sane. He is branded dangerous. The clear-eyed thinker surrounded by delusion is not seen as wise. He is ridiculed, exiled, even silenced. And the crowd, swollen with numbers, always mistakes noise for truth. You may believe you are immune to this, that with your education, your reasoning, your critical mind, you could never fall prey to collective madness. But look closer. Ask yourself, how many of the beliefs you hold most dearly are truly yours? How many of your words are echoes of the herd, carefully repeated so you won't be cast out? And when was the last time you changed your mind because of evidence rather than social pressure? If you struggle to answer, you are not alone. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, "The crowd is untruth." He wasn't exaggerating. He understood that once we gather into masses, something fragile inside us begins to break. Our individuality dissolves. Our inner compass weakens. We look not to reality, but to one another for guidance. And so, if everyone around us is insane, then insanity itself becomes the new normal. But here's the brutal truth. Mass psychosis doesn't always come with hysteria, riots, or visible chaos. It can look ordinary. It can look polite. It can wear suits, speak softly, and smile for the cameras. It thrives not because people are stupid, but because people are afraid. Afraid of ridicule, afraid of being alone, afraid of the silence that comes when they stop chanting what everyone else is chanting. This is why conformity spreads faster than truth. It is less painful, it costs less, at least at first. So here you are, standing at the edge of a terrifying question. If the majority of people have surrendered their minds, what does it mean to remain sane? To think clearly when everyone else thinks in slogans is not comforting. It is lonely. It is costly. It can feel like madness itself. And yet, this is the crossroads every free soul must face. Do you follow the herd into comforting illusions? Or do you endure the unbearable clarity of seeing reality as it is? This is not just philosophy. It is survival. History is littered with civilizations that collapsed not because of foreign enemies, but because they surrendered to mass delusion. They mistook noise for wisdom, hysteria for truth, obedience for virtue, and every time it began quietly, with ordinary people, just like you, who were too tired, too distracted, or too afraid to ask, is this real, or is this madness? In the minutes ahead, we will strip away the illusions. We will expose the machinery of mass psychosis. We will uncover how ordinary men and women become hypnotized into blindness, and how a few resist. But before we go further, sit with this unsettling thought. If the crowd believes the illusion, and you alone see the truth. Are you free? Or are you the last prisoner left? The machinery of mass psychosis is not built with steel and gears. It doesn't roar like a factory or march like an army. It is invisible, subtle, and terrifyingly efficient. It lives in the mind, and it feeds on fear. To understand it, you must first confront something uncomfortable. Human beings are not naturally rational. We like to believe we are creatures of reason, guided by logic, armed with knowledge. But history proves otherwise. Over and over, societies have collapsed into illusions, even when truth was right in front of them. Why? Because beneath our intellect lies something far stronger, our need to belong. The psychiatrist Carl Jung warned of this long before the age of social media. He saw that when individuals are cut off from meaning, purpose, and a sense of inner anchor, they become vulnerable to suggestion. A person without a strong inner compass will seek identity in the crowd. And the crowd, Jung warned, is not guided by reason. It is guided by fear, propaganda, and the desperate need for safety. The individual asks, "What is true?" The crowd asks, "What will keep us together?" And so, truth is sacrificed on the altar of belonging. The French thinker Gustave Le Bon, in his classic The Crowd, revealed something chilling. Individuals in a mass lose their sense of responsibility. They stop thinking as adults and begin reacting as children. Their critical faculties collapse, replaced by raw emotion. Logic becomes irrelevant. Evidence no longer matters. What matters is the feeling of unity, the adrenaline of being swept into something larger than oneself. It is in this emotional frenzy that people who would never harm a neighbor can suddenly endorse horrors, persecutions, and absurdities, simply because the crowd assures them it is right. And then, there is the famous Asch conformity experiment conducted in the 1950s. Participants were shown a series of lines and asked to identify which ones matched in length. The correct answer was obvious. Yet when actors in the room deliberately gave the wrong answer, real participants, feeling the weight of the majority, also gave the wrong answer. They doubted their own eyes just to conform. Think about that. If we are willing to deny what is literally in front of us just to avoid standing out, what else will we surrender? Multiply that instinct across millions, add the reach of modern media, amplify it with fear, and you no longer have individuals. You have a hive mind, a hypnotized mass. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw this coming. Madness, he said, is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule. He understood that insanity spreads not like a virus, but like fire. One spark of fear, one convenient lie, one seductive narrative, and suddenly, rationality is consumed. Nietzsche knew the real danger was not in lone madmen shouting at the sky. It was in the millions who nodded, repeated, and enforced the madness of the age, believing it was virtue. And here lies the hidden machinery. 1. Disconnection. People lose meaning, certainty, and trust. Anxiety grows. 2. Simplification. A narrative appears, offering villains and heroes. 3. Conformity. Fear of standing out silences dissent, even when most secretly disagree. 4. Aggression. Those who question the illusion are branded as threats. 5. Collapse. Eventually, reality cracks the illusion, but not before enormous damage is done. This is the cycle of mass psychosis. Not chaos, not stupidity, a system. Predictable, repeatable, devastating. But here's what makes it even more dangerous. It doesn't feel like madness when you're inside it. It feels like safety. It feels like righteousness. It feels like sanity. Those consumed by mass delusion don't see themselves as hypnotized. They see themselves as protectors of truth. They look at the few who resist and say, "You are the crazy one," and that is the trap. The deeper the psychosis, the more convinced the herd becomes of its sanity. Look around today and you will see it everywhere. People repeating slogans they do not understand. Movements filled with rage but empty of reason. Communities policing not truth, but compliance. Ask a difficult question, and you will be mocked. Present evidence, and you will be ignored. But parrot the illusion, and you will be applauded. This is not intelligence. This is not progress. This is the hidden machinery of a world willingly abandoning itself. So the question is no longer, does mass psychosis exist? The question is, how much of your life has already been absorbed by it? How many of your thoughts are truly yours? How many of your convictions are echoes of the herd? And how much of your silence has been purchased by fear? Because silence is not neutral. Silence is consent. This is the hidden machinery of madness, quiet, seductive, relentless. But what happens when it takes hold of a society for too long? What does it do to our institutions, our relationships, our very sense of reality? That is where we now turn to the consequences of collective delusion and the price we pay for mistaking conformity for truth. When mass psychosis takes hold, the damage does not remain confined to the mind of the individual. It seeps outward. It infects families, friendships, nations. It rewrites laws, reshapes cultures, and redefines what people believe is possible or permissible. The cost is not just personal, it is civilizational. First consequence, the collapse of truth. When the herd embraces delusion, truth is no longer measured by evidence. It is measured by consensus. If enough people repeat the illusion, it becomes the new reality, and those who resist it, even calmly, are treated as dangerous. The philosopher Kierkegaard was right. The crowd is untruth. Because once untruth is shared by millions, it acquires the force of a religion. Think about how this looks in practice. The journalist who dares question the narrative loses their platform. The friend who points out the obvious inconsistency becomes toxic. The thinker who refuses to conform is labeled extreme, hateful, or insane. This is not an accident. It is how a psychotic society defends itself. Second consequence, the loneliness of clarity. The truth seeker is not celebrated. They are isolated. Socrates was condemned for asking questions that revealed contradictions in Athenian society. Galileo was threatened for daring to align with reality instead of authority. Dostoevsky himself, exiled to Siberia, saw firsthand how society punishes those who see too much. To resist the collective madness is to accept exile, sometimes literal, often emotional. You may know this in your own life. That heavy silence when you express doubt about the popular opinion, the nervous glances, the sudden change of subject, the quiet distancing. This is how the herd protects itself, by branding sanity as dangerous and madness as safety. Third consequence, the weaponization of fear. Mass psychosis thrives on fear. It is both the spark that ignites it and the fuel that sustains it. Fear of disease, fear of war, fear of the other, fear of being cast out. When fear rises, people no longer think, they react. And when enough people react together, entire populations become pliable. History shows us that fear has been weaponized again and again by tyrants, by demagogues, by institutions hungry for control. The terrifying truth is that once fear has saturated the herd, it no longer requires a dictator. The crowd begins policing itself. Neighbors turn on neighbors. Friends censor friends. Ordinary citizens become the enforcers of madness. And all the while, the architects of this hysteria rarely need to lift a finger. Fourth consequence, civilizational decay. Rome did not fall because of a single invasion. It rotted from within. Distrust, corruption, and illusions about its own strength ate away at its core. By the time the barbarians arrived, the empire was already hollow. The same is true of every society that loses its grip on reality. The danger is not foreign conquest. It is internal collapse. When truth is silenced, when fear becomes the operating system, when conformity replaces courage, societies eat themselves alive. And in that collapse, the most vulnerable pay the highest price. Children raised without truth, communities left without trust, a culture where lies are passed down like heirlooms. Fifth consequence, hostility toward the light. The deeper a society sinks into mass psychosis, the more violently it reacts to truth. A calm argument is met with rage, evidence is mocked, reasonable dissent is painted as evil. Nietzsche warned us, madness is the rule of ages, not the exception. In a sick society, sanity looks like provocation. This is why truth-tellers are always few in number, and why their courage always comes at a cost. Because when you pierce the illusion, you don't just reveal truth, you reveal to the crowd that they have been living a lie. And there are few things the human ego resists more fiercely. But there is one more consequence, perhaps the most insidious of all, the loss of our ability to suffer well. Mass psychosis trains people to escape discomfort at all costs. Pain is labeled toxic, doubt is labeled dangerous, hardship is treated as failure. But suffering, endured with clarity, is the crucible of growth. It sharpens the mind, deepens the soul, and reveals what comfort hides. When societies erase suffering by drowning it in distraction, medication, or illusion, they also erase the path to wisdom. The result? A people comfortable enough to survive, but too hollow to live. And so we arrive at the brutal irony. The consequences of mass psychosis do not look like chaos from the inside. They look like order, they feel like unity. They masquerade as progress, but beneath the surface, everything essential is corroding. You must understand this. Mass psychosis does not end on its own. It deepens, it spreads, it consumes, and the longer it reigns, the more difficult the awakening becomes, which means survival demands something rare, something dangerous, something difficult, rebellion. Not rebellion in the shallow sense of slogans and noise, but rebellion in the truest sense, reclaiming sovereignty over your own mind, because if you do not, the herd will gladly claim it for you. And that is where we go next, into the rebellion, into the fire of self-ownership, into the terrifying, liberating path of becoming immune to the illusions of the age. History has shown us that madness spreads like wildfire. Once ignited, it consumes reason, infecting villages, cities, and nations with a kind of hypnotic fever. But history has also shown us something else. Rebels of the mind. Men and women who stood against the tide of mass delusion, not by shouting louder than the mob, but by cultivating something untouchable within themselves, mental sovereignty. You see, true rebellion doesn't begin with protests in the streets or slogans painted on banners. Those are echoes of something deeper. The real rebellion starts in the quiet chambers of the mind. It begins when you decide, no matter the cost, that you will not outsource your reality to the crowd, the media, or the authority who claims to know better than you. It begins when you reclaim your thoughts. Carl Jung once wrote that the crowd is always unconscious. What he meant is this: individuals, when swept into the mass, no longer think, they react. They trade awareness for belonging. They trade truth for safety. But sovereignty is the refusal to make that trade. Sovereignty is the ability to stand in the storm of propaganda, the endless noise of trending narratives, and still whisper to yourself, I will see with my own eyes. I will think with my own mind. The rebellion of mental sovereignty requires 3 acts of courage. The first act is silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of awareness. When the world shouts in hysteria, demanding that you scream with them, you choose stillness. You watch, you listen, you ask, who benefits from this panic? Who profits from this division? In silence, you begin to hear what the mob cannot. The quiet lies between the loud words. The second act is questioning. Every great collapse of reason in history was fed by unchallenged assumptions. The Inquisition burned heretics not because their evidence was false, but because no one dared ask if the church could be wrong. Totalitarian regimes thrived not because their ideologies were sound, but because no one dared question the narrative blaring from the loudspeakers. Questioning is rebellion, It is refusing to treat slogans as sacred. It is looking at the obvious and saying, "Prove it." The third act is detachment. Herd mentality feeds on your need to belong. It whispers, if you disagree, you will be cast out. If you resist, you will be alone. But detachment is the recognition that solitude is not death, that standing apart may feel cold at first, but in that coldness, you recover your warmth. Detachment does not mean apathy. It means your identity is no longer chained to the approval of the group. You belong to yourself. And here's the paradox. Once you detach, once you reclaim your sovereignty, you become untouchable. They can ridicule you, cancel you, even fear you, but they cannot control you. And that is what terrifies them most. A man who thinks for himself is unpredictable. A woman who refuses the script of the mob cannot be manipulated. A sovereign mind is a revolutionary act. Nietzsche warned us that the price of independence is loneliness, but he also promised that it is the only path to greatness. To rebel is to walk into that loneliness willingly, to embrace it as a crucible where truth is forged. And when you return from it, you return not as a follower, but as someone others instinctively look to in times of chaos. This is the essence of mental sovereignty. You no longer need the crowd to confirm your reality. You no longer bend under the weight of false consensus. You see the illusion for what it is, and because of that, you stand free. The rebellion begins not with armies, but with awareness. Not with weapons, but with questions. Not with a mass uprising, but with the courage of a few who dare to think in a world gone mad. And if enough minds reclaim themselves, if enough individuals rise from hypnosis, the mass psychosis cracks. And through those cracks, light enters. This is your rebellion. This is your sovereignty. And it begins right now. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when the noise begins to fade, the slogans lose their grip, the hysteria quiets, and what remains is silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of realization. The crowd was never your compass. It was your cage. Mass psychosis thrives because people fear being alone more than being wrong. They accept lies not from conviction, but from comfort. Lies are warm, shared, and safe. Truth is cold, solitary, and sharp. But the instant you choose truth over belonging, something changes. You realize that clarity is worth more than applause, that freedom is not rebellion, it is transcendence. Awakening is not discovery, it is recovery. You are not finding something new, but remembering something ancient, an inner compass buried beneath fear, distraction, and noise. Kierkegaard warned us, the crowd is untruth. Truth begins in the individual, the soul that dares to see itself without mirrors. When you no longer rely on reflection, you no longer live at the mercy of distortion. You become immovable. And this is what terrifies the herd. A person who no longer fears rejection cannot be controlled. A mind that no longer seeks consensus cannot be hypnotized. A soul that remembers its compass becomes untouchable. You stop reacting. You begin observing. You stop chasing. You begin aligning. Your presence itself becomes rebellion, not because you shout louder, but because you refuse to play the game. This is why mystics and sages described awakening not as bliss, but as disruption. Light blinds before it guides. It exposes shadows you tried to hide, forces you to grieve the years you traded for illusions, the bonds built on falsehoods, the truths you denied to survive. But grief is not the end. Grief is the doorway. Walk through it, and clarity emerges. A clarity so sharp it feels as if the world has changed. But it is not the world that changes. It is you. Viktor Frankl, who endured the camps, once wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. That why is the anchor mass psychosis cannot touch. It is the inner root that fear cannot dissolve, propaganda cannot erase, conformity cannot corrupt. With it, you stop drifting with the herd. You stand rooted, weathering storms that would drown the masses. And here lies the paradox. The true escape from mass psychosis is not to fight the herd, but to transcend the need for a herd altogether. This does not mean isolation. It does not mean rejecting humanity. It means refusing to build your identity from illusions. You speak truth not for applause, but because silence would betray you. You walk with clarity, not to lead, but because you cannot bend. And when you stand this way, you discover you are not alone. Across every age there are quiet rebels, scattered but luminous. When you stand, they find you. This is the final awakening, to walk in truth without needing validation, to stand in clarity without demanding consensus, to live with courage even when surrounded by madness. The herd will call you insane. They may mock, reject, even despise you. But you will know what they do not, that sanity is not measured by numbers, that truth is not created by consensus, and that freedom is not rebellion. Freedom is this, to be whole, unshakable, and luminous in a dark world. So the question is no longer what is mass psychosis. The question is, will you awaken from it? Because in the end, the greatest form of madness is to be sane in an insane world. And the only real freedom is to be sane anyway.